The biggest debate right now in the Little Nightmares community is whether Little Nightmares 2 is a sequel or a prequel to the original game. However, I actually think that almost everyone is missing out one key detail that makes this whole debate even more complicated. In this video, I'm going to give you my theory on Little Nightmares 2 timeline and explain why I think it's far more broken than you might realize. Spoiler warning, I'm going to be spoiling the entire franchise here. I'm going to be spoiling the games, the DLC, the comic books, and even the mobile game, so just bear that in mind. If you don't want spoilers for any of the games, probably want to click off now. You have been warned. So before I give you my theory, I have to explain the current theories the community has already come up with. In my latest poll, I asked you whether you thought Little Nightmares 2 was a prequel or a sequel. The vast majority of you think the game is a prequel, but a fair number of you still think the game is a sequel. So where does this debate stem from? Even before the release of Little Nightmares 2, some people theorized that Little Nightmares 2 would take place before the events of the Maw in the first game. The main reason for this is that at the end of Little Nightmares 1, we see Six gain, steal, or unlock large amounts of power, presumably dark magic. We know this because Six kills and seemingly consumes the souls of a bunch of the guests, characters she had to flee from earlier in the game. Not only does she kill them, but she does so with ease, barely lifting a finger in the process. So if Six has all this power, why is she trapped in the hunter's basement? Presumably she could just kill the hunter, right? Many people question this from the trailer footage when that was released, but there is even more evidence. If you unlock the secret ending of Little Nightmares 2, you can see that Six leaves the signal tower via a TV after she Mufasa's Mono.
Long live the Queen.
After she returns to the Pale City, we see Shadow Six, or Dark Six, who looks over to an advertisement of the Maw, and Six's stomach begins to rumble, implying that this is all set prior to the events of the first game. However, those who think that the game is a sequel cite a developer apparently stating that the game is indeed a sequel, and although I can't seem to find evidence of this myself, the game is called Little Nightmares 2, which by traditional naming standards would set this after the events of Little Nightmares 1, since pretty much every single 2 in a movie or a video game is a direct sequel to the first one. We also know that there is a confirmed prequel to Little Nightmares 1 already, the mobile game, Very Little Nightmares. So the devs clearly understand this naming structure. This is a different dev studio who made Very Little Nightmares, by the way, but it is confirmed canon. What makes this even more confusing is that we see Six climb down the mountain after the protagonist of Very Little Nightmares dies, and we see the yellow raincoat floating in the water. This implies that this is where Six gets the raincoat. So she had the raincoat at the end of the prequel, and she had the raincoat in the first game, but she doesn't have it in Little Nightmares 2. We see Six pick up the raincoat in Little Nightmares 2, but is this the first time she's wearing it? I doubt it. So with this, the majority of people now believe that this is the timeline of Little Nightmares. Very Little Nightmares, Little Nightmares 2, and then Little Nightmares 1. But this still doesn't explain why the games are in incorrect order. Why would 2 come before 1? Maybe the devs wanted it to be a twist ending. After all, they did hide the secret ending behind unlockables, but let's be honest, many people already had the theory this was a prequel before the game even launched. Would it be worth a confusing and chronologically incorrect game numbering for such an obvious twist? But as I tried to piece this all together, and I tried in vain to come up with a canonical timeline for all 3 games, I started to notice some weird things going on with the timeline in Little Nightmares 2. Now, before we really dig into my theory, we also need to talk about the time loop or paradox theory. At the end of Little Nightmares 2, we see Mono transforming into the Thin Man, or maybe just growing up inside the signal tower made him become the Thin Man. The time loop theory comes from the fact that the Thin Man already exists before Mono becomes him. He kidnaps Six and he even chases Mono at several points in the game, but without Mono reaching the signal tower and Six letting Mono fall at the end, the Thin Man would never have been created and would not be able to chase Mono nor kidnap Six. This is a time paradox. Fun fact, when the Thin Man chases Mono, you can often hear this noise. Which sounds just like when you put a microphone next to the speaker it's playing out of. That horrible sound you can hear is called feedback, or sometimes a feedback loop.
Don't do this.
According to the audio company Shure, the people who make the microphone I'm recording this video on by the way, acoustic feedback occurs when the amplified sound from any loudspeaker re-enters the sound system through any open microphone and is amplified again and again and again. This is a nice subtle hint or foreshadowing of what's going on here. The signal the Thin Man puts out is the same signal that Mono is putting out, causing this horrible feedback loop sound we hear when the Thin Man and Mono get too close. So Mono at least seems to be trapped in a time loop. This is a great theory and I think that this is mostly true, however I think the theory doesn't go quite far enough. With a time travel paradox we need, well, time travel? How is the Thin Man able to travel back in time to chase Mono and capture Six? Well, sit back, ladies and gents, because this is where my theory comes in, and I think it explains it all. Damn, I wish I had a catchy intro. The Thin Man is able to time travel because the entire Little Nightmares 2, the Pale City, the surrounding areas, in fact everything that the Signal Tower is corrupting, is being transformed into one giant TV show, and I don't just mean in a traditional sense. My first clues for this came from the Pale City. Whatever happened here seems to have happened a long time ago. Many of the buildings are crumbling and falling apart, the streets are littered with overflowing rubbish that would have taken a while to build up, and we see that the post office is incredibly backed up. And for a city this huge, we never see a single living human aside from the viewers, but even then, some parts of the Pale City don't even have any viewers, and others have many. So the evidence points to the Signal Tower corruption happening a long time ago, or taking a long time for it to have an effect. But then there are a bunch of things that just don't make any sense. These animals locked in cages are still alive, surely they would have starved by now without somebody feeding them. These pots that are collecting rainwater haven't overflowed despite the rain continuing throughout most of the game, and this was the biggest thing that bugged me. After you see the viewers throwing themselves off the roofs, you drop down into a room with a chair, a table and an ashtray. The weirdest thing about this is that the ashtray is still smoking. This is not an oversight either. There are plenty of ashtrays in the game that are not smoking. The devs specifically chose to animate this one like this, and we know that they haven't just copied and pasted it from somewhere else. It's almost as if somebody was just here, but we see no evidence of anybody being alive here recently. It can't be a viewer, we never see them doing anything aside from desperately trying to watch their TV. They don't eat, they don't drink, and they definitely don't smoke. I mean, they don't have mouths anymore. So this got me thinking, was somebody just here? Or, more likely, is time in the Pale City broken? We've been thinking about time in this game as either a line, like a normal timeline, or a loop, like in most time travel paradoxes. But what if time is actually more broken than that? We know that the Signal Tower has the power to corrupt this entire city, even bending and twisting the buildings. But more than that, we can see that inside the Signal Tower, time and space don't behave normally. The Portal-esque puzzles we have to navigate and the floating objects we see around this location prove that physics aren't exactly working properly here. They are just as warped and twisted as everything else in this world, which could absolutely explain why some parts of the Pale City feel like somebody was just there, but others feel like they've been abandoned for years. But as I started going down this rabbit hole, as I tried desperately to piece this all together, why is the Signal Tower corrupt in time and space? Why is Mono and the Thin Man able to teleport, travel in time? Why are these scratch marks everywhere? I started to notice something. Mono's power, and therefore the Thin Man's power, requires a TV to work, or perhaps the signal acting through the TV, but it's definitely linked to the TV either way. We see that Mono needs a TV to be able to travel through space, the physical space, not outer space. He always puts two hands on the TV to use his powers, but then, as he gets closer to the Signal Tower and defeats the Thin Man, he suddenly has the ability to travel a great distance without the aid of a TV. Why? Because he's already in the TV. Everything we see is slowly being transformed into a TV show by the Signal Tower. That would explain why Mono no longer needs a TV to use his powers. The signal is all around him now. As he's closer to the Signal Tower, the signal is stronger, the TV show has taken more of a hold. But don't worry, I have plenty more evidence to back this up, and not only that, I also have a whole theory about how the Pale City being a TV show explains almost everything about this game. Let's look at the odd effects that we only see in the Pale City. Things coming to life. In the school we have the porcelain children, and in the hospital we have the mannequins. Both things are not alive, not really, yet in different ways they both act alive. The bullies copy behaviour you might expect from children of their age, although slightly exaggerated. The mannequins aren't real people, most of them don't even have real heads, yet are somehow able to sense Mono and move when light is not directly shining on them. If we assume that this is all one big TV show, this absolutely makes sense. Think about characters from any TV show or movie. Let's just take Luke Skywalker from Star Wars. Luke Skywalker isn't alive. He doesn't exist, but yet on our TV screens we see him living and breathing as if he were. Sure, some characters have makeup, even prosthetics, to shape them into characters that we see, but none of them are real. Yet good TV convinces us that they are. Mark Hamill brought Luke Skywalker to life with his acting. Going back to the bullies, many of them act like extras you see in movies or TV shows. They just continuously act out their background roles, further adding to the lie that is filmmaking. Now, to explore this a little bit deeper, at the start of the game we see a hunter has taxidermied his family, yet they don't ever come to life. Well, why is that? Because either they are too far away from the signal tower, or they never got exposed to the TV signal. The hunter came to life because he stumbled across the TVs we see in the forest, the ones that Mono comes out of at the start of the game. But if you notice, in the house where these taxidermy people are, there are no televisions. There is no way for the signal to get to them. This is why out of this entire world where everything seems to come to life, these are the only things that don't. So we've established that the mini-enemies we see in the game are basically the extras of a TV show, brought to life by the signal. Well, what about the main cast? Well, we have those too, and coming up with this theory, I found another juicy little secret. The main cast of the characters are also caught in the time loop. Think about it, we theorized that the hunter shot himself, right? That's why he has the bag on his head with the hole and he looks pretty beaten up. Well, notice how he meets his demise. Did he shoot himself? Or did we shoot him? What if he never shot himself in the first place? That bag in the hole was put there to cover up the bullet wound that we caused when we shoot him. This also fits with the Doctor. One thing I noticed on my first playthrough is that the Doctor seems to be crumbling when he crawls across the ceiling. You can see these little flakes coming off of him that no other enemy in the game has. Well, what is this? It's Ash. Ash from the furnace that we locked him in. Even the teacher could fit this theory too. The last we ever see of the teacher, she's putting her neck in the vent to try and catch us. What if the entire reason she's able to stretch her neck in the first place is that when we escape through the vent, she gets her neck stuck in the vent, and trying to reach us or trying to get free, her neck gets twisted and stretched out of shape. We already know the Thin Man fits in this loop theory, but yet again, we had to kill Mono for that to happen. So all of the main cast of this TV show are existing in both the past and the future simultaneously. It's not just a loop, it is broken time. That is why the hunter has already been shot before we shoot him. That is why the Doctor is already being turned to ashes before we burn him. And that is why the teacher already has a stretched neck before she tries to stretch her neck through the vent. And that's why Mono is already the Thin Man before he becomes the Thin Man, because they are all existing in both the past and the future. Now this is kind of basically the same as the paradox theory, but just a little bit further to that. Now this fits with the children of this game too. Let's assume that I was wrong in my previous video when I stated that 6 might have been the one that drew the tally marks on the wall in the hunter's basement. Let's assume that all of the tally marks were done by the girl with the pigtails and bloody nose. She is the only one that is confirmed to be making these scratch marks, as we see her do it in the comic with the spoon in the hospital. We can also see her spoon in the room here with tally marks, which is a big coincidence for me. So if she is making them all, how did she manage to be in the hunter's basement, the school, and the hospital, since we know it took both 6 and Mono to escape the hunter's cabin? Well, quite simply, she's been in multiple locations multiple times. When we see her dig her way through the tunnel to another room in the hospital in the comic, the room that she ends up in is already filled with tally marks. What if these children are repeatedly living this scenario over and over again, but the world, or the set in this case, remains constant? Almost like a TV show. Think about it. I could watch any episode of Game of Thrones, probably the good seasons, not the last one, in any order that I like. I could start season 3 right now and pick an episode out of that, and then I could switch over to season 1, episode 1. Or I could just watch the same episode over and over. The timeline of Game of Thrones hasn't changed, but I, the controller of my TV, or the viewer, have both bent the rules of time and space in what is being shown on the TV. I have travelled great distance in time and space in the blink of an eye. In this meta-universe, I am literally bringing characters to life at will too, characters that aren't really alive. So if we look at the Pale City like this, the children dying might not even be their end. They could die in one episode but be born again in the next. But since the world hasn't been fully transformed, the locations and even some of the people still have their own level of permanence. The children are just trapped in this world, they haven't yet been fully transformed by it. The glitch kids exist in another episode, but not this one. If we think about it, someone, probably Mono, but maybe even the residents of the Pale City, which make up those giant eye monsters by the way, are all watching these episodes over time. Even us, the gamer, have been given hints that we are actually watching a show. When you select a chapter in the game presents this as a TV screen, even going so far as to changing the channel when you select a new chapter. Obviously the TV is a major theme of this game and it's probably just an excuse for the devs to make a cool looking menu, but think about the deeper meaning here. When you play chapter 1, you are changing the channel so you, the viewer, can watch episode 1 of Little Nightmares 2 TV show. But in reality, there are many episodes all going on simultaneously because people are viewing them. But since the signal tower is corrupting time and space, some of them bleed into one another, and that is why we see the glitching remains as they are officially called. So if this theory is true, where does this fit in with the timeline? Unfortunately, I don't have anything concrete, and this theory could work either way. I do think that these TV show episodes will continue as long as Mono is trapped in his own bubble universe. So while Little Nightmares 1 occurs, Little Nightmares 2 is still happening. It has happened, it is happening, and it will happen. In that way, you could argue that Little Nightmares 2 is both a sequel and a prequel simultaneously. That would explain why we see hints of the future in the signal tower. We can see Six's suitcase from the moor in the room where we meet corrupted Six, but if this is a prequel to Little Nightmares 1, how is this here? If these TV shows are happening all across time and space in this world, this suitcase could be both a past and a future item, because after Six kills the lady in the moor, this show is still playing, and at the end of Little Nightmares DLC, which runs alongside Little Nightmares 1, we see the Thin Man on a TV in the moor, implying that this bubble universe is still intact. So rather than thinking about the timeline of Little Nightmares as a line, we should think of it as multiple lines running alongside each other, but the timeline of Little Nightmares 2 being twisted, warped, and corrupted, bleeding into the other timelines, which is why we see references to the future in the past and the past in the future. What makes this even more compelling is this would explain why we see Roger's mask in the workshop of Little Nightmares 2. Read Roger's official description. With long forgotten things from long forgotten places, he fled the world and found them more. Long forgotten? Well, we see his mask here, and then a few hours later, Six escapes the signal tower and presumably makes her way to the moor. While Roger's already there. He seems to have been there for a while, he has a job there after all. Roger was made by the Doctor, and he was brought to life by the signal tower, but then Roger manages to escape the warped timeline and makes it to the moor. Maybe this package that Mono delivers is given to him and that's how he finds out about it. So the Roger's mask we see here is both the mask from a long forgotten past, but the same mask we see in Six's very close future. It exists in both because we are literally watching an episode of this show that was set a long time ago, but you could watch that episode right now, you could watch that episode in the future. This is where the timeline gets all twisted and confused, which is all happening because of the corruption of the signal tower, which all happened because of the paradox that Mono is in. Very confusing, I know, but I hope I explained that well enough for you to understand. So this is my theory about the timeline of Little Nightmares 2. Is it a prequel? Yes. Is it a sequel? Yes. It exists in the entirety of the Little Nightmares timeline, and depending on when you watch this TV show, will depend whether it's a sequel or a prequel. In fact, I think everybody's right. And everybody's wrong, all at the same time. And even though I think the developers are trying to hint that this canonically happened before Little Nightmares 1, I think if you dig just a little bit deeper, you can see that it did happen before Little Nightmares 1, but it also happened after Little Nightmares 1, and during Little Nightmares 1. It's happening across all time and space, and so basically, everybody's correct. I really hope you have enjoyed this video. This has been my favorite one that I've made so far. I think that there's probably things that I have missed in this theory, and if you go back through the game now and play this game with this theory in your mind, you'll probably find things that even I missed. So I really hope you go back and play it and actually use this theory and try and find some extra evidence. Let me know down in the comments below what you think. Do you think that this is true? Do you think this is completely wrong? Let me know. I want to hear all of your theories too. I've been really trying my hardest to go through as many of them, reply to them, read them. There's some great theories down in the comments, guys. I really enjoy them. I also want to say a massive thank you to everybody who subscribed. We just hit 10k subscribers, and I'm still honestly quite in a lot of shock about that. I don't know how we managed to get to 10k so fast, but you guys are awesome. I hope you continue to enjoy these videos, and I will see you next time.